7th grade. Welcome to week 7, day 1. Today is May 4th. May the 4th be with you for all my Star Wars fans out there. So I'm just going to show you what you're responsible for today. So we're going to click on the classwork tab. You'll notice that there's a new agenda for the week in case you use it as like kind of a pacing and what to expect each day. So you can click on that. The agenda is available right here for you to kind of get an idea of what we're going to be doing throughout this week. I'm going to scroll down. You'll see that we have week 7, day 1, May 4th. And our lessons for this week are a spiral review based on 2 questions that we noticed that a number of you struggled with on the benchmark that we gave on Monday of spring break. So I just wanted to go over these 2 questions, and all the 7th grade teachers are doing this with their classes just to really solidify, to make sure that you guys better understand these 2 particular questions. So the lesson is right here. There's also this link which we're going to be using. It's an online fraction and decimal calculator. So I suggest clicking on it because we will be using it as we do some of our work for today's lesson. But I'll go back to that after. Okay, so I'm going to show you the lesson. So we have our target. We're going to reassess our understanding of number sense by completing a spiral review. Jamie answered the question by choosing B. She was marked incorrect. What could she have done to check her work? So this is one of the questions that we wanted to review. It says, what value will make the equation true? And we have negative 2.1 minus blank equals negative 1.5. So B was a common answer that some of you selected on the benchmark and were also marked incorrect, which is why we wanted to review different strategies to know how to answer it correctly. So what she could have done was taken her answer, 0.6, plugged it in, and seen if negative 2.1 minus 0.6 does equal negative 1.5. You could do this on your calculator, on your phone calculator, because they're both decimals. And I think most of us know that negative 1.5 is the same as negative 1.5. So if we saw that we got negative 2.7, we would know that 0.6 could not be the answer because it does not equal negative 1.5. I think if you were doing this by hand, you had to remember to use keep, change, which would have made that 0.6 negative. And when we have the same signs, we add and keep the sign. So maybe those were some of the misconceptions that were made for those students who selected B to be marked incorrect. So what is the correct answer? Well, we're going to go through a couple of different ways that you could have answered this to get to the correct answer. The first way would have just been to guess and check, taking each of the choices that were provided, plugging them into the equation, and seeing if you would get negative 1.5. So 3.6 did not work. We got negative 5.7. That does not equal negative 1.5. We already saw that 0.6 does not work because negative 2.7 does not equal negative 1.5. When we plug in negative 0.6 to our equation, we do get the correct answer. We do get negative 1.5, which is the same as negative 1.5. So C was actually the correct choice. And D also does not equal negative 1.5. It equals positive 1.5. So this is one way you could have answered this question by just simply plugging in the choices and seeing which one gave you the correct solution. Now, the other way we could have done it is replacing the question mark with a variable and looked at this as an equation, because most of you became very, very good at solving equations like this. We just use our inverse operations to isolate that x. So if we make that our equation, we would have inversed this negative 2.1 by adding 2.1 to both sides. And on this side, we would have seen that it canceled out. And on this side, we would have had to combine. So to combine negative 1.5 and 2.1, you can do that a few different ways. One is you can convert negative 1.5 to a decimal and then add negative 1.5 to 2.1 and get 0.6. The other way is you can convert 2.1 to a mixed number, which would have been 2 1/10, and then added the 2 mixed numbers together and still get 0.6. The other way is you could use your fraction to decimal calculator, and I model this here. So this is the website that I told you about before. If you click on the link, you're going to see a fraction and decimal calculator. And what you're allowed to do is change the different ways. So for our example, we have a fraction first plus a decimal. So you would go to a fraction comes first, click that, and then you're able to put in the fraction that you want. So we would have put -1, and then I would put half in the fraction. And then we are adding, right? Let's see. Yes, we are adding 2.1. So I type in 2.1 and press equals. And then you will see the work is provided here. They give you 3/5, but that's the same as 0.6. Okay, so this calculator does the work for you. Normally in school you would have a calculator like this, which also does the work for you. So we're allowing you to use that link as a guide. Okay, so some of you might be wondering, well, we just showed that 0.6 was not the correct answer, and that's correct. Here is where the column mistake happens. So you know that this combination is 0.6. What a lot of students forget is that this x was actually a negative x because there was a minus in front of it. So this is now negative x equals 0.6, and x is not isolated yet. We have to remember what is in front of that x, even though we don't write it, but it is still there. In front of that x would be a -1. We can put a 1 in front of that x. So if -1 is in front of x, then we have to know what to do to isolate it at this point, which would be to divide by -1. And when we divide by -1, our solution comes out to -0.6, because 0.6 divided by -1 will give us a -0.6, which supports what we got before, choice C. Okay? So we're going to spend a little time on this, just going over how to find those missing values in an equation like this. So I'm going to do this question here. So we have 3/2 plus question mark equals -7/2. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to replace the question mark with a variable. You can use any variable you want. I'll use x for this one. And we just rewrite the equation with x. Now, our goal is to get x alone. So I'm going to inverse the constant, which in this case is 3/2. Since it's positive 3/2, I'm going to subtract 3/2. Because if you remember, 3/2 and -3/2 are additive inverses, so their sum would be 0. 3/2 minus 3/2 is 0, so this cancels. Okay, whatever we do to one side, we do to the other. So my x would come down and be isolated. And then here we have -7/2 minus 3/2. So again, you can go to the link, okay? You can go up here. Sometimes they don't, this one, it's a fraction and decimal calculator. We need a fraction and fraction calculator. So this would be this choice right here, online fraction calculator. You click it, and then you can put in 2 fractions and combine them any way you want. If you want to change the operation, you just click that. We have minus, okay? And you would put in -7/2 minus 3/2, okay? And that answer is going to be a -10/2 or -10/2. And then what you want to do is always simplify if possible. So -10/2 would simplify to x equals -5. Okay, so our solution would be -5. And then what you can do to check is take -5 and plug it back into where the question mark is. Do 3/2 plus -5 and make sure that you get -7/2. If you do, then you know that your solution is correct. If you don't, then I would go back and check your work again. Okay, so that's our first example. The work is provided here as I just modeled, okay? And we'll continue. So here are the steps. You're going to replace the question mark with a variable, apply your inverse operations, remember to divide by -1 if the variable is negative, and then simplify. So there are 2 more questions here. I'm going to do the one on the left side. So we have 3/7 minus question mark equals 4/7. So the first thing we want to do is replace our question mark with a variable. So I'm going to write 3/7 minus a, I'll use this time, equals 4/7. So my goal is to get a isolated. So I'm going to inverse 3/7 by subtraction, since 3/7 is positive. Whatever we do to one side, we do to the other. And 3/7 minus 3/7 will cancel out. Now here's what you have to remember. This a is not by itself. This a has that negative sign. So I am bringing down negative a equals 4/7 minus 3/7 will leave us with 1/7. Now, some of you might think we're done, but we're not, because this a is not by itself yet. That negative sign is there. So we have to remember in front of a is a 1. So what we can do now is we can divide by -1, because -1 is multiplying a, so the inverse would be division. Anytime there's a number or a coefficient in front of a variable, it means it's multiplying the variable. So the opposite or the inverse would be division. Whatever we do to one side, we do to the other. So -1 over -1 will cancel out. It equals 1, which leaves us with a positive a. And 1/7 divided by -1 will just be the opposite and be -1/7. And that would be our answer. And then what we could do to check is we could take -1/7. We can plug it in here. We could do 3/7 minus -1/7 and see if it gives us 4/7. And it will, okay? So there's another equation on there for you to do as well. The work follows. Then we go into decimals. Same idea though. What you're going to do is you're going to replace the question mark with a variable. This time you used b. And then you solve your equation like you know how to. You guys did great at this. So we would inverse by subtracting, since it's +4 or a +4. We -4 from both sides. This is a reminder, if you're doing it by hand, to make sure you remember your integer rules and line up your place values. This 4 is in the ones place. You would not put it underneath this 4. Okay, I think most of you are using your phone calculator, which would be fine. This could easily be punched in, but remember you also have the link over here for any time you're dealing with fractions. Okay, we have a couple more for you to try. Answers follow. And then there's a question where it's decimals, fractions, and negatives. Oh my. So I'm going to do this one with you, and then we will wrap it up for the day. So for this example, we have 4.8 minus question mark equals -6 1/4. Okay? So the first thing we want to do again is we want to replace the question mark with a variable. So I'm going to write 4.8 minus, I'm going to use x this time, equals -6 1/4. Okay? And now I'm going to solve this like I normally would. I'm going to inverse my constant, which is positive 4.8. So I'm going to subtract 4.8. Whatever I do to one side, I do to the other. Okay, so these two 4.8s will cancel out. I bring down not only x, I'm going to bring down -x because that minus is there. So now I'm left with -x equals. Now this calculation I don't really feel like doing, so I go to the link. I notice that I'm still on fraction calculator, so I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to go to fraction and decimal calculator. I click that, and now I'm able to put in, let's see, we have a fraction minus a decimal. So I'm going to click the option that a fraction comes first, and then I put in my equation right here. I put in -6 1/4 minus 4.8. Okay, and then once you do that, you press equals, and you will get a fraction, and they will also give you the equivalent decimal form, which is what I'm going to write here. Okay, so now remember our variable is still negative. We have to get rid of that. So we do that by remembering there's really a 1 here, and this -1 is multiplying x, so the inverse would be to divide by -1. I do that to both sides. -1 divided by -1 is +1. I don't need to put that 1 in front of x because we know it's there. And if I divide -11.5 divided by -1, it becomes a positive 11.05. Again, what you want to do to make sure that that solution is correct is take 11.05 and put it where you have your question mark. And you would check, does 4.8 minus 11.05 equal -6 1/4? Okay, so that's pretty much what we're focusing on today, just going over equations like this. The answers follow, and then you have an exit ticket to complete at the end of the lesson once you've reviewed all of it. So I'll go back here, You guys will see that your exit ticket is right here. You're going to complete after going through the lesson, making sure you're confident with it. Remember to use that calculator link that we gave you with the lesson, and you'll complete your 5 questions, and then just remember to click submit, okay? The questions are a little shuffled today, so your name might be at the bottom and your class might be somewhere in the middle, so just answer in the order that they come in, okay? I hope you're all staying safe. Take care.